Groundhog's Day. Let's do this video again. I hated that last video. It went far too long. Basically, this video is going to be a summary of the previous ridiculously long video. Back in March, I believe. Back in March, the economy hit the skids. Now, the economy didn't hit the skids because of magical reasons. It hit the skids because COVID-19 started making people sick. The public got freaked out. We didn't necessarily know what to do, how to treat it. Science was trying to play catch up. And from the standpoint of businesses, well, keeping the business open seems like it would proliferate the illness. So rationally, you try to separate people. You try to social distance. And part and parcel to that was people staying home. Now, many jobs were able to conform to the fact that people could stay home. And in conforming to it, people had newfound freedom where they could be at home, maybe with their kid, maybe with their dog, maybe with their spouse, get their work done and have a life. That may be something that is retained, especially if people feel some kind of way about retaining that, holding that aspect of their life, meaning they're able to actually have somewhat of a life during the course of a day, as opposed to all of their energies being spent and then they go home. So that may be something that's positive that's retained from it. But from the standpoint of retail stores and those type of things, those stores took a hit. And depending upon where you were on the economic ladder, well, that to some degree gives, let's say, context to where you ended up after this hits. Half of the country is in poverty before COVID. Meaning before COVID hit, you had, 20-something million that didn't have health care. I think when Obamacare was signed, you had like 26 million that didn't have health care after it was signed. So you have all of these people that were already, let's say, without health care. You had 42% of the population that was in literal technical poverty. But the technical poverty number is always far, far lower in order to try to make the government look better than what it is. In audits terms, you're talking about like half of the population being in poverty before COVID hit. Now, the people who were working at those stores that paid those poverty wages, those people lost their jobs. Those people lost their jobs. You had people who were doing gig economy, right? That was the big new thing. Well, what happened? Well, you can't have a gig economy if the gig stops. When people aren't engaging with one another, when people are shutting themselves in, that stuff stops. And so what do as a society, as a social safety net? You got to do something. You got to cover the fact that you've just shut down the economy in order to keep these people safe. The government gives $1,200, but it also gives PPP loans out and sends money out to people who, or at the very least some people who lost their jobs, put in some measures for rent control and some measures for student loans. All of these things, of course, help in the sense of stop having a bill. But the problem is cash in pockets, not just from the standpoint of human beings who aren't working now, but also from the standpoint of those businesses. How do the people who rent those businesses pay their landlords? How do those landlords pay the bank when the people can't pay for their rents? And beyond that point, where do people work when you're not allowed to basically have gyms, massage parlors, etc., open? You have people working at those places. Yelp comes out and basically says this. "60% of business closures due to COVID-19 pandemic are now permanent. 60% of business closures due to coronavirus pandemic are now permanent." You're talking about roughly 20 million people, give or take, out of a job. That also means that those people don't have health care in the middle of a pandemic. That means that you have 12 million people infected, 250, 260 million people that are dead. That number is skyrocketing. And all of this is just in a spiral. Biden is going to come in with an economy on the brink and also a population spiraling out of control in regards to COVID-19. And it is as if Trump is punishing America for basically not selecting him for the next term of the presidency. And there's one extra bonus to this. It's not a bonus at all. The deal that Democrats and Republicans are working out in the Senate is for far, far, far less than anything that would be of significant benefit to our society, especially in regards to this particular issue. Now, the money that Trump put out could have helped, but it didn't help. And there's a very specific reason why. Because basically, big business ends up taking the money that was meant for small business and struggling small businesses, especially the loans that were going to be forgivable. Some of the loans were going to be basically, hey, we're going to give you a loan. If you stick with the guidelines, pretend like you didn't get it. Imagine the amount of help that would be for these struggling companies that need to pay rent, that need to keep the lights on, they need to keep their employees. But no, what ends up happening is the bigger companies inch their way in, horn their way in. Do you realize that the only reason we have this information in regards to how those PPP loans were spent is because the media has to fight tooth and nail to rip that information out. And they dropped the information out last night. Interestingly to note, not only did the struggling small businesses get screwed in this, not only is the 60% of closures due to COVID-19 permanent, it's not the COVID, it's inactivity of the government, incompetence in the government, not managing a system appropriately. And let's be very honest, the mismanagement of the system is likely on purpose to create all sorts of holes and loopholes for his cronies to get their hands on money that they don't goddamn deserve. We as a society can make a choice that we will take care of one another. As a collective, there's no God above that forces you to do one thing or the other. It's just us. This choice has to be sufficient for us in regards to what we want. It makes all the sense in the world for society to say, look, we're in the midst of a pandemic. We need to ensure that our society is made whole. And the only person or group or being, force of will that can do that, they mean care to do that, is government. Government, under the pretense of helping people with COVID-19 or helping businesses stay afloat with COVID-19, yes, some businesses were helped in this process, but understand it was a leaky boat, and the businesses that were helped gave cover to all of the money that basically went into the hands of cronies, oligarchs, people who had no right to get their hands on that money. And if we're being bluntly honest, didn't need it. Didn't need it. Including Donald Trump's own organization and Donald Trump's son, Kushner. They were able to get their hands on the cash too. I'm going to go through how the loans were spent, and I'm going to go through how Donald Trump was able to get his hands on the money. I'm also going to go through some of the ridiculous stuff that was allowed. I mean, in some cases, you had like 100 cases where people didn't even name a business. Think about that. You're getting your hands on cash and you're not even naming, or the business doesn't even have a name. All of those businesses that went belly up. I want you to think about that. Think about the number of businesses that could have been helped. Think about the number of people that could still be working or still be furloughed or whatever. As I'm reading to you how that money was spent, I want you to think about the 60% of business closures that are permanent. Those people weren't able to get the help that they needed because basically the big business and the cronies that Donald Trump allowed to be in positions, we'll call it incompetent, call it planned incompetence, whatever you want to call it. I'm making the point that it seems intentional that these guys were able to get their hands on money that belonged to people, to struggling small businesses. And yeah, I call it planned incompetence. Welcome. Long intro, but welcome to the soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, and subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. This content is brought to you by you, and I appreciate you the opportunity for allowing me to do it. So months of litigation, months of fighting, haranguing back and forth, and finally, the information is released. How did you spend the cash? Now, the idea that we had to fight for this is in and of itself problematic. If you did something right, oftentimes you'd be crowing about it. When you're not crowing about it and you're in government, there's probably some skeletons in that closet or something you don't want people to see. And lo and behold, that logic also folds for something like this. Donald Trump wasn't crowing about it. The details, anyway. The fact that they had to fight to get information about how our money was spent is problematic in and of itself. But they get the information, and lo and behold, it is worse than you could ever think it is. I'm just going to go through some of this. The data reveals the most complete accounting to date of more than $700 billion in forgivable loans Congress and the Trump administration introduced in spring for allowable expenses, including payroll, rent, utilities, mortgage, interest payments. Now, I'm just going to go over some of this. In fact, I'll show it. Over 25 PPP loans, Paycheck Protection Loans, worth more than $3.65 million were given to businesses with addresses at Trump and Kushner real estate properties, paying rent to those owners. 15 of those properties self-reported that they only kept one job, 0 jobs, or did not report a number at all. The loans to Trump and Kushner properties included $2,164,543 to the Triumph Restaurant Corporation at the Trump International Hotel and Tower, New York City. The company reported money didn't go to keeping any jobs, and it later closed. A company called LB City Inc., which at Kushner's Bungalow Hotel in Long Branch, New Jersey, received a loan of $505,552.50 that it used to keep 155 jobs. The tenants at 725th Fifth Avenue, Trump Tower, received more than $100,000 to keep 3 jobs. Tenants, 4 tenants at Kushner owned 666 Fifth Avenue combined received more than $204,000 and retained only 6 jobs. Now, the interesting part here, over 100 loans were made to companies where there was no business name listed, or was listed as no name available, or showed the potential data entry errors, such as names appeared to be dates or phone numbers. More than 300 companies appear to have each gotten more than $10 million in loans through their subsidiaries. Now, this wasn't supposed to happen because there was supposed to be a ceiling on various types of loans. So right off the bat, data entry errors, and this comes across as if they were just trying to throw money out as fast as they possibly can. And who it went to, they were less picky. And in situations like that, who do you think was able to capitalize? Who do you think was able to benefit? Large national banks initially gave loans only to customers with whom they had existing lending relationships. Businesses owned by people of color without strong banking relationships found themselves with limited access and forced to find themselves other routes for funding. There was also persistent questions of what defined a small business. After lobbying for hotel and restaurant industry ballooned, the maximum number of employees allowable, 500, even though 98% of small businesses in America have fewer than 100 employees. All right, I was right about that the first time around. Think about that. 98% of the small businesses in America have less than 100 employees. But these guys were able to whittle this definition, push further, dumping money further, opening, till it gets to the point where 500 employees. I mean, at this point, you're not really talking about small businesses. You're just talking about small businesses in a way that they're politically casting it. Yeah, I understand that it was beneficial to some. I understand that it helped a lot of people get over, the barrel. But you must understand that the people that it helped was basically covering for the people who was just looting it and taking money that they didn't necessarily need for their big business, not struggling business. I want to go further into this. So, right here, this is Forbes. More than half of the roughly $525 billion in loans doled out through November went to just 5% of the more than 5 million recipients. Think about that. More than of the 500, because this gets to the idea of how the money was spent. 525 billion in loans that were doled out up to November, 5%. Or just, I'm sorry, let me read this one more time. More than half of the 525 billion doled out through November just went to 5% of the people who were of the 5 million. So think of it this way. $525 billion. Cut it in half. And I'm going to take that half and I'm going to give it to just 5%. Now, the question becomes, well, what happened to the other businesses? What happened to the other small businesses? Aren't they going to also need that money? Yes, they're going to need the money, and the money is not going to be there. And when the first CARES Act went through, if you remember, that money was used up very quickly, and they had to pass a secondary funding source. Well, it doesn't seem like the money was being put out in this kind of fair, equitable way. Additionally, while the SB originally argued that 87% of the loans went to small businesses, a majority of the total issued in loans was actually given to bigger businesses, the Washington Post reported. And new data shows that only 28% of the total funds were used for loans of less than $150,000. Meaning, for all of the proclamations of we're doing this for small business got the worst end of that. Big business was able to appropriate much of those funds. That's amazing. The reason why I pointed out the number of businesses that went belly up is because I want you to get a clear indication of these businesses went belly up, but the money was there and available. Big business was able to get their hands on it, and the Trump administration left a leaky boat for them to do just that. Planned incompetence. Here's another one. Right here. Let's flip. New data revealed that parents of White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany received up to $2 million for their Tampa-based roofing business, which previously disclosed as a PPP recipient in July. A granular analysis of data by NBC News revealed more than 25 loans valued at roughly $4 million went to businesses at properties owned and rented out by the Trump Organization and family, President Trump's son-in-law and top advisor Jared Kushner. 15 of those properties said they kept one job most or failed to report any number at all, reported by NBC News, which was one of the 11 news organizations, along with Washington Post, that sued for the data's release. All right, right here. More than 100 loans were made to businesses with no name. We did that one. In October, SBA Inspector General said there were strong indicators of widespread potential abuse and fraud in the PPP, including tens of thousands of businesses that received loans despite being ineligible for them in November. A federal judge ordered the SBA to disclose all names, addresses, and exact loan amounts issued through the PPP after a Freedom of Information Act from the aforementioned 11 news organizations were pushed through. Look, whatever you want to think of Trump, you can love Trump all you want. But let's just be very clear. And, whether you want to say Democrats do it too, fair enough. But Trump has looted the Treasury twice. The first time around in that grotesque tax cut that basically took money from the poor in order to give to the rich. And in this, where basically he puts through a plan that, yes, helps some businesses, but basically ends up using the help of some to cover for the malfeasance of this other kind of corruption that's going on, where the majority of the money goes to actual businesses that don't need the money. So, yeah. It stinks. To put it mildly, it stinks. Donald Trump is on his way out, and he was able to loot the Treasury on his way out. I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, I want to say subscribe. Definitely make sure you're subscribed. I would say check, make sure you hit the button and you hit the bell also to ensure that you are there. And I will talk to you guys later. I wanted to do the video over again because I didn't like the first video, and I thought it took too long. And I got to be honest, at this point, I'm not sure how long this video went either. Like, share, and subscribe. Thanks all.